This talk is about ducks, and a lot of people keep coming to my talks because they have ducks in them and they don't know why. It's kind of a theme with me, and we'll kind of get into it. So first off, oops, who am I? What is this guy doing here? What do I do? Well, I'm an evangelist for BoldGrid. BoldGrid is a suite of plugins for WordPress. But this talk's not about BoldGrid. I also travel around the world as an evangelist. So you can see that that's me at some WordCamps, checking out the far right photo is me teaching a class at a university over in Rhode Island to their education students about WordPress and things like that. WordCamp Europe in Paris last year. I'm also the treasurer of Open Source Matters. And for those of you who don't know what Open Source Matters is, it is the foundation, the legal entity of the Joomla project. And this is usually, if I'm at a WordCamp, that I get the audible gasp, like, what is he doing here? Who let him in? And here's the thing is that I love open source and open source, all things. We'll talk a little bit about open source. Oh, hey, we got some gasp in the chat. So there we go. I love open source, and I think tools are tools, and I love WordPress. WordPress is an amazing tool, but it's just a tool. I recommend you check out other tools that are out there, JavaScript, PHP, go to those conferences, because you're going to meet amazing people, and that's kind of the main thing. I'm also a husband, video game lover, former Disney cast member, and an owner of a wonderful dog. That is a picture of my dog. Her name is Balana. For those of you that get the reference, congratulations. You two are a geek. And I get to travel around to all sorts of conferences. In fact, last year, I got to go to Salt Lake City for a Mommy Blog conference. And yes, that is professional male dancers dressed as unicorns. And I was one of 3 men in the entire conference. So it's always very interesting, all the different places you get to go and talk about web and what's kind of happening and all that fun stuff. So I really love community, and that's kind of why I travel full time. I had 175 nights in a hotel last year. So I'm a road warrior, and I just love connecting with people and happy to be here today. So first off, I want to talk about a little bit about my love of WordPress. I love that WordPress is very inclusive, that it accepts everything and everybody, and that bottom line, WordPress is here for everybody, and the open source community is here for everybody, because WordPress is just people. And that's the awesome part about WPCampus, all the WordCamps, everything that happens to be out there is that WordPress is just people and everything related to it. So I definitely am happy to be here, and just encourage everyone to get more involved into different communities and open source is people. And that's kind of why I am here, because open source is just so important to my life. And I think it's so important to the foundation of the internet that we have as a whole. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about A/B testing. So this isn't a traditional A/B testing talk. We're going to talk about things that you might not know of. This talk is one of those things that usually pisses people off because they think that it's a little bit crazy, but it's kind of my point is to shake you up and get your mindset thinking in a little bit of a different direction. So in the chat or, thumbs up, who has tried any split testing or A/B testing in the past? If you ever tried that, just post an emoji in the chat. Okay, a couple people. Excellent. And usually when I ask a lot of people, A/B testing, this is usually the story that I get when I'm at a live event. I'm like, oh, great. Tell me about your A/B testing experience. Oh, well, I did this or I did that. And let me know if this sounds familiar. So you change, go up, your conversions go up or whatever, you change something else, the conversions go down, and you really don't know why, or you're changing multiple things, or it doesn't really seem to be working. Has anyone ever had that experience where you're trying to do A/B testing or split testing or changing stuff on a website, and it doesn't really seem to give you the results that you're looking for? That is very common because a lot of people don't know some basic tenets of how A/B testing works, and they think it's this magic pill and all of this other stuff. So I kind of have a very different opinion on A/B testing and split testing, and I have experience using it at Fortune 500 companies when I was in charge of agencies and things like that. It's a very, very cool tool, and it's one of the most fun ways you can play around with either a client or at your institution, because every place has goals. And that's the first thing that I like to talk about, is that you need to have a goal. What's the purpose of the project or the page or the site? If you don't have your goal written down, and we're going back to basics here, SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, and timely, it's not going to work. You have to have a goal written down. And then the first thing I like to talk about with A/B testing is that it is controlled. It is controlled. Who here has ever changed 3 things on a website and then results went up or down, and then you changed 5 more things, the results went up or down? Who has done like that scattershot approach of kind of A/B testing in the past? Yeah, a few people. That's usually what most people do, is they change stuff, they see results happen, and they change more stuff and they see results happen. But correlation is not causation. And I think that's what we need to, keep telling ourselves time and time again, when it has anything to do with web, is that it needs to be controlled. So with that, I recommend using a tool to help you manage it. Only test one thing at a time. And we're going to go over some crazy test examples a little bit later, but only test one thing at a time. Maybe it's a photo, maybe it's a headline, maybe it is a call to action. Whatever it is, only test one thing at a time. Now, this next question I usually ask, I'm sure it's going to be a little different with this audience. I say, who here has a doctorate in applied statistics? Who here is really good at statistics or statistics professor? And I usually don't get anyone that ever raised their hand, although at one conference I did, and this one I'm sure I'm going to get that as well. But there is margins of error with A/B testing, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. I will also talk about tools you can use with WordPress that allow you to kind of use some of these things. So it's controlled. The reason you don't want to do multivariate testing or test multiple things against your site is that you really don't know what's making the change. There are tools that allow you to do multivariate testing to know what combination is the kind of that magic combination. But here's how you have to look at A/B testing. Your website or your project or your intranet or whatever is a magic money machine. And you need to optimize it as best as possible so that you can tweak that machine to output more of the results that you want. Now, it might not be revenue in your case, because in the education world, but you want to make sure that that magic money machine or that magic conversion machine is as optimized as possible. And you might be surprised on the crazy little things that happen to work and give you some good results. So it's controlled. Next, it has to be statistically relevant. I asked who here has a doctorate of applied statistics. It has to be statistically relevant. There's a margin of error when you do A/B testing or split testing. A lot of people don't realize that. If you have a low traffic site, one conversion can throw off all your data. So how do you make sure it's statistically relevant? Well, there are WordPress plugins that help you do that, but there's also third-party tools such as VWO, Visual Website Optimizer, or Optimizely, as well as some native WordPress plugin ones that allow you to put your test in, run the test, and it's going to say, yep, this is statistically relevant, or nope, it's not heat testing, or it's statistically relevant, but it's not the test isn't going in the right direction, so kill the test, move on to something else. And I can't stress that enough. Make sure you are using software that will tell you if your test is good or not. Just looking at the data won't make a difference. I once had a client, they were an e-commerce client, and they made a bunch of changes in like September, and their sales went up month over month, and they were all excited about it. I said, great. How does that compare to year over year? because it's e-commerce and the fall season is the holiday shopping season. And they're like, oh, well, they're lower than what they were last year. Then okay, well then that test might not be helping you, because you need to kind of think about the whole picture. Because if your sales just go up because it's the holidays, it's just because it's the holidays. So you got to factor in all of those different factors. And there's software that helps you do it. And the nice thing about VWO and Optimizely, either of them, is that they work with WordPress fine, or any other CMS you happen to use, and they require zero development. You can build these tests with just an easy drag and drop interface. And you can do everything from simple things like changing a photo to more complicated things, and they can help you with multivariate testing as well. So make sure it's statistically relevant. Next, I would say do micro testing. And that goes back to the single variant versus multivariant testing. You want to test just one element at a time, because unless you have a high traffic property, and I'm talking tens of thousands of visitors, in most cases, you're going to have a better job and be able to run more tests through micro testing or single variant testing. The reason for that is, again, we go back to it being statistically relevant. You want to make sure that it's outside the margin of error and that the test makes sense. And most tests you design are not going to give you the results you want. Most of the time, it's going to be flat, or maybe a dip, or just a slight increase. You want to make sure you are looking at your goal and figuring out why does this website exist, and figuring out the best test for that. And you want to run as many tests through that to make sure that you can help that goal kind of move in the right direction, kind of help that conversion machine get tuned up a little bit. And stuff changes over time too. Something that is true today might not be true in 12 months. And every user base is completely different. And a lot of people ask what to test. So in the chat box, if you want to just kind of write in ideas of what you could A/B test or what you could split test against, if you're kind of testing on a website, any website, doesn't have to be your own. Different calls to action, plugins, different menu choices. So, you could have different, yeah, cool. Yeah, all those are great ideas, and keep them coming. But we're going to talk about a few and then go to my crazy list. And my crazy list is really the part of the talk that people find the most humorous. But buttons, you can test buttons. There's so many things you can test buttons. Tone of voice and content. That's one I've never heard before, but it's an amazing idea. But you can test buttons, the call to action, the color of the button, the shape of the button, simple things. I once had a client, they were a national insurance company. We did A/B testing for them on a conversion page. And we tested everything. I mean, everything under the sun. We had professional user group studies and all of this stuff done. And what converted for them the most, got them about an 80% lift in applicants to their insurance policy, was a 2-pixel drop shadow on the call to action button. I tested that thing with 500,000 visitors just to double check it. I even tried moving the button around just to make sure that didn't make a difference. And it was the silly drop shadow. So the things that you think might not make a difference, sometimes do. And someone mentioned, oh, there goes your flat design. But sometimes design can be built around some of these concepts. Text. Someone talked about tone of voice. Danielle says often there's one way that the college has talked about itself for years, but it might not be the most effective way. That's entirely correct. You know who is usually the worst people that think about who's using their website? Usually the managers of the company or the institution that's managing the site. We had a client when I was doing freelance agency work, and they were a food company. And they said, who our target market is? College students. College students and sororities. That's our target market, and that's who buys our product all day long. Well, wasn't converting. So we built up a new website, and in the website testing, we did some A/B testing, and we started looking at the results, and we noticed not a single EDU IP is even coming to their site. So it can't be these college students. And then we looked into it. You know who was? Single family homes, moms, first time moms were the people visiting that website because it was an all natural food product. And that's who was buying it. And so we started focusing the marketing on that stuff, and it started converting. It started converting, even higher. And you know why they said it was all these colleges and sororities? Because it was a subsidiary company of another company, and the son of the owner of the original company gave the management responsibilities for this new brand to his son who just left college. So from his point of view, oh, everyone I know that's eating this product is in college. So that's obviously the best market. Now, I'm not saying that market wasn't appropriate for some marketing, but it wasn't the most effective for what we're trying to do. So text, definitely try all these different things with text. Tone of voice is very good. No. Okay, good. My computer started spinning and I thought I was going to have a crash. Images. So many things you can test images. You can test, stock images, non-stock images. Who here uses stock images? A few people probably use stock images. And then who here hates stock images? There's probably a whole other group of people that hate stock images. Usually the people that hate stock images, sometimes are the photographers in the room. But here's the thing is, it depends. Sometimes stock images convert way higher than non-stock images. And then sometimes stock images convert awful. There are some user groups that relate even better to stock photography than original photography. And we'll get into some crazy examples and some real case studies a little bit later. But again, test it. And that's the cool part about A/B testing is design these tests. When you're looking at your goal, write a hypothesis statement. And that's what I do. We write an actual hypothesis statement. We believe changing this will have this result because of this case study or white paper that we read in the industry. So definitely check it out. But what I recommend is every month, if you're going to do, let's say, 5 tests, do one crazy test. Do one test that you think never in a million years will go that direction, that defies logic. Because every once in a while, and more often than you think, about a quarter of the time, that test will perform way better than all of your well thought out tests. So we'll kind of talk about some of that stuff in a little bit. And bottom line, everything. You can test everything on A/B testing. There is nothing on a website that you can't, look at, and there's no sacred cow. Where's the sidebar? What's the color? Do you really need images on this page? Things like that. And with that, now we get into the fun part of the discussion, my crazy list. So this list is literally the list that I use. But before that, I want to talk about an example of some crazy stuff. So during the presidential campaign, yep, I'm going there, but I'm trying to stay neutral. The presidential campaigns did A/B testing. And one of the most successful fundraising efforts of the Trump campaign, we'll get to Hillary Clinton in a minute, was donating money on the website. You donate money, your name will be on our Facebook page. They wanted to have people feel like they had an ownership of the campaign, feel like they have a piece of it. Now, I personally might not want to donate to that individual's campaign, but I understand where they're coming from. A lot of people, I usually ask, how could you do that technically? Oh, I do it with JavaScript or this cool video software. So the name kind of flies in and all that fun stuff. Well, here's what they did. This is a live screenshot of the actual video from the official Trump campaign, printing out the names of the donors on a laser printer, 20 at a time. This was up the week before the election on the official campaign's Facebook page for 8 hours. Now, everyone usually laughs at this point and like, oh my God, they don't know technology. If you think for a minute this was not deliberate and planned, you're sorely mistaken. And I think we can all agree that Trump cares about his brand equity. And if the Trump campaign, which is a luxury brand, I think we can all agree on that. At least that's how it's perceived. That's how the goal is perceived to be. Can get away with this. So can your institution. So can the Fortune 500 companies. And that's kind of where I kind of come from and kind of get to the next list. Hillary Clinton did similar tests with different things as far as like giveaways. Like, do you want a signed copy of her book and a contest, go see Hamilton with me and things like that. And Trump did some of that too. But it all depends on who they're targeting. And this was one of the most successful fundraising efforts of the Trump campaign. So A/B testing doesn't have to even just be on the digital space. It just has to do with conversions in general. So, shake it up and don't think that there's any sacred cow when you are doing work in your institution or your projects. Because at the end of the day, look at the goal. The goal is why you're doing this. The goal that you wrote down, that SMART goal. And if a test can't fulfill that goal, then why are you even doing it? So this is the same checklist idea that I use for all of my stuff. Now, this comes out of a book. I'll tell you guys how to get that book in a little bit. But basically, let's start at the top, and I'll give some examples of how it kind of works. Professional versus unprofessional. Who here has gotten one of those, mail solicitations that has things crossed out and notes in the margins to donate money to save the unicorns or something like that? Those mail solicitations exist, and a lot of people are like, oh, those things just don't work, whatever. But they do work on some people. Certain user groups, they do work on. So you might want to test an unprofessional layout. Now, this is an extreme example. I'm not saying you need to actually get a crayon and design your website, but sometimes a not as polished of a layout does convert better. There's a reason why those direct response pages online that scroll forever and have screenshots of how much money I made, there's a reason those exist. Because for a certain mindset of a certain type of people, they do convert. So again, it all goes back to testing to see who's visiting your site and what's working for those groups, because every set of groups are different. And just because it works for one set of people, it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work for the other set of group of people. Photo versus illustration. Try an illustration. There's clip art and stock illustrations out there. Design your own. Use a service like Fiverr or hire a designer. Sometimes illustrations kind of shake it up. Here's an easy one. One color versus another color. And when you're testing colors, try testing accessible colors versus what you currently have. Because the accessibility, the WCAG 2.0 standard, that usually is good for SEO, and it usually converts better because 1 out of 4 adults in the US have something that's covered under the WCAG 2.0 standard. So, when you're testing colors, test to make sure they pass the WCAG 2.0 AAA standard. Low brightness contrast versus high brightness contrast. Just little subtle changes can make the biggest difference sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. But you'll never know unless you test. And that's at the end of the day, that's all that it kind of boils down to, is make sure that you are testing everything, and it's not a sacred cow until you tested it. If you've tested it, great, move on. Take the learnings, apply the learnings, and then do another set of tests. It's so easy to get budget when you can prove months over month you're getting better results for your goal. So focus your budgets on that. Focus on this testing. Don't do scattershot testing. Just do consistent testing and kind of help it move to your goal. Border versus no border. Again, that's pretty easy to kind of go with. Clear image versus a blurry image. Sometimes it works for certain people. Static versus animated. Now, imagine that car is kind of going, so that's the animated car. But sometimes animations work and it kind of breaks it up. Ugly versus sex appeal. Sometimes, traditional and plain looking people convert better. Sometimes models convert better. It really depends on the type of person you're talking with. There are so many different people in this world. Some have never been, high school graduates. Some have a GEDA. Some just have different personalities. So it's very easy to kind of look at these different things. Static versus interactive. In this example, get 50% off, or choose if you want the pizza or the donut to get your 50% off discount for, excuse me. Professional stock photos versus amateur informal photos. If you can't take your own custom photography, there are professional stock photo companies that specialize in amateur informal stock photos. So there's still options to get around it with that sort of stuff. One layout versus another layout. Again, I saw that earlier in the chat. Definitely check out the layout options out there. One call to action versus another call to action. This example is like get your free trial today, or click here for instant options, actions, or whatever the case happens to be. Images versus text only. You want to make sure that, I'm going to make this a little bigger for people. There we go. Images versus text only. Sometimes not having, there we go. Images versus text only. Sometimes not having images on the page just convert better. They just sometimes do. I've seen it time and time again, and it's kind of a fun one to test. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be an ugly text layout. You can still make text look beautiful, and this all has to follow your brand standards. And this is where I say you have brand standards, but you can still make these same ideas work with those brand standards that you have. So don't throw your brand standards out the window unless you get permission to do it. But a lot of people just get so stuck in this is how we do it, and this is the way that it's been done forever, and I'm never going to change this because I'm a designer and I laid this out. Well, if it's not fulfilling the goal of the site or the project or the page, it's not fulfilling its purpose, and it's doing a disservice to your visitors. Upright versus angled. Pretty self-explanatory there. A button versus a blue underline text. Again, very easy. Regular border versus a false border and drop shadow. There's my friend, the drop shadow. I love that drop shadow. So many tests wasted for a drop shadow. Custom ad design versus familiar UI elements. There's a reason why Facebook elements are popping up everywhere. There's a reason why we're starting to see the things that are in Facebook now in these other applications. Good UI and good user experience is good UI and good user experience. Now, I am not saying make an application that looks directly like a Facebook thing so that people think they're on Facebook. You don't want to do that. I think there's a word for that, deception or fraud. But you can take some of these ideas and apply them. There's a reason why a lot of the menus of the newest applications are going to the bottom of your phones, because the phones are getting so big, you can't reach the top. So kind of check that out. Also, the text-only thing is very interesting because the largest growing population of internet users on the planet have text-only devices. And that's in the developing third world. And for those of you who say, well, my website's not for them, I always take that attitude as a little bit condescending because, yes, you have your institution and your students that are visiting the site, but sometimes you might have content that's useful to the greater community. And it's good to have an option for those people that can't have images or don't have devices that can load because they're just on a little flip phone that they're all sharing in maybe a remote part of Africa, as an example. Original image versus a mirror image, and this goes back to the title of this talk. Which way does your duck face? So this is a study that was done. There was a picture of a duck. The duck was facing left in one test and facing right in the other, and the right-facing duck converted more. Anybody have any ideas about why the right-facing duck converted more? You can put it in the chat. Forward versus backward. People read left to right. It's facing the content, looking at the content. About every 4 times I give this talk, I point in the direction of the content. I'm not sure, but I finally get some closure on the direction of the duck. Yes, well, I'm doing a follow-up to this talk at all the WordCamps this year called What the Duck. So there'll be more ducks in my future. But every 4th time I give this talk, somebody says, because the duck is looking into the future. And I find that really funny, but it does happen about every 4 times I give this talk. Here is the real reason about why the duck is converted more about 80% or 75% more to the right. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let me stress that again. It doesn't matter. The minute you throw out the window, you trying to quantify and realize everything that happens and why the users interact with your website, the easier your job's going to become. Yes, we can probably assume and think about why certain things and best practices and all of that will convert better. But at the end of the day, you know what makes the biggest difference? Your goal. And all that matters is data-driven decisions. Let data be your guide. If the data proves out that it's going in the direction that you want and moving the needle, why does it matter what the reason is? Why does it matter that a 2-pixel drop shadow converted more? We can think about all of these reasons and try to think about why that's a big thing. But at the end of the day, every department that I've known that has tried to quantify it and tried to replicate it and tried to find that secret sauce has had a really hard time doing it. Just test it. And if the test works, great, keep doing it. Tune that magic conversion machine. And then if it starts getting a little wonky a year later, tune it a little bit more because users change. So let's stop trying to put reason to everything. Not everything has to have a reason. Sometimes it's just data. And if the data is true and you tested enough people, well, that kind of proves it out. Get through these really quick. One font size style case versus another font size style case. A standard ad shape versus a custom ad shape, like a circle. Although in today's world, the circle is like the standard ad shape, I find. Positive versus negative. Want to fall in love with your spouse again versus sick of fighting with your spouse. We had a client that had a fire suppression product that stopped stove fires. You know what kind of worked is your mom's gonna leave your mom's alone, lives alone now, and she's gonna leave the stove unattended, and the house is gonna burn down. Not necessarily the best, most friendly thing, but sometimes it does work. So it depends on what your client is and what kind of project you're doing. Why isn't this moving? Generic versus relevant to the time period. Want a girlfriend? You can meet single women here, or home alone on a Friday night, or want a girlfriend by Christmas? And how do they know it's Friday night and it's almost Christmas time? You can mention discounts and things if that applies to your project. You can use trust logos versus no trust logos. Trust logos are to be very careful with because sometimes they don't actually convert better, and you have to make sure you have the right to use that trust logo for example, Better Business Bureau. Unless you pay extra money and not to use it online, you can't use their logo. And sometimes trust logos can backfire if you ever lose that trust logo. For those of you that might remember My Pillow, the infomercial Pillow King, they lost their Better Business Bureau and went from an A+ to an F, and they kind of lost it overnight. So definitely be careful with trust logos, but they do work sometimes. The most successful people that use trust logos are the losers of America's Got Talent in the early rounds, not the finals, the early rounds, because they say, as seen on America's Got Talent, oh, well, they must be good because you don't remember them. And it takes like 12 years to get through one of those seasons. So how do you remember what happened in the beginning? So it's very interesting to see how trust logos can get used, and it's a great thing to test. Real quick, just kind of going to get through these just real quick. You can use these different weapons of influence, liking, social proof, authority, 1 million sided, students agree, things like that. This is from the book Influence by Robert Cialdini. Other things to test: fear and pain, benefits, not features. Ask a question, be controversial. Fake news, as it were, I suppose. Use short words, evoke the 5 senses, appeal to the 8 universal desires, enjoyment, comfortable living conditions, keeping up with the Joneses. Social approval works a lot, very well, especially in university settings, things like that. Facebook likes, things like related to that. And play and have fun. That's the bottom line of all this, is that A/B testing is one of the most fun things you can do with your sites. It's just, it makes it fun again, because you can do these crazy things that you think won't work in a million years, but they do sometimes. One crazy test every 4 normal tests is what I highly recommend. Now, real quick, how to get that book. I'll show you how to get it. It's from a gentleman called Russell Brunson. He operates a product called ClickFunnels. You can get his book at dotcomsecretslabs.com/free-book. And I'll walk through how to do that because he came out of the direct response world selling supplements, and now he sells ClickFunnels and coaching and things like that. He was on CNBC's The Profit, and all of that. But how do you get that book? You go to this website, you fill out this form. The book is free. You have to pay for shipping, however. The second page, you're going to opt out of the offer. And I'll get to, I saw that question. I'm just going to get to it in 1 second. Then you'll get another offer page at the very bottom. You say no thanks to that upgrade offer. Set another upgrade offer page. You say no thanks to that. Close that window because these are all upgrade offers. And if you do not want the emails, although I recommend keeping them because he does have some good stuff, unsubscribe. Keep in mind, a lot of his stuff is related to the direct response industry. So you have to take that and apply it to your unique circumstance and situation. So with that, I'm going to jump over to the questions. Would you advise running one A/B test at a time? Yeah, it depends on your traffic. So you obviously don't want to test a subset of a test. So if you use a tool like VWO or Optimizely or one of the WordPress plugin options, although I do like the third-party ones because it doesn't ever edit your WordPress site. It just does it through a JavaScript change in the browser window. You don't want to test a subset of a test. If you have enough traffic, you can do more than one A/B test at a time, but if it gets a lot harder because I only recommend testing about 10% of the overall traffic to the site so that the majority of the visitors see the original production content. You don't want people having to change every time they visit the site and having it get kind of crazy. But I would recommend about if you can have enough traffic to test more than one test with about 10 to 20% of your traffic only doing those tests, definitely check it out. But it'll tell you in the system if you have enough traffic or not. If you have too many tests built and you don't have enough traffic, it's going to say traffic's too low, suspend some tests or whatever the case is. So it kind of depends on how much traffic is kind of going through that. And that question was from Samuel. Wilson writes, ideas for A/B testing when the end goal is SEO improvement. Well, SEO improvement's a goal, right? So, what specifically about SEO are you looking for? Are you looking for rankings? Are you looking for click-through rates? Are you looking for higher quality traffic, that stickiness? So you can use it as your goal. So A/B testing, I would focus on the content and the page weight. So maybe different types or smaller images or graphic elements, and seeing what it does to the rankings. The problem with that is I would focus on the traffic and filter the traffic out from those that come from a search engine, and you can do that. The issue is the lag time for the search engines, because it is a big algorithm, don't always take into account A/B testing as quick as you'd like. But that being said, you can definitely test for that and look at the goal and figure out what the goal of the site is and A/B test around that goal. Because if the goal of the site is to get higher rankings, that's great, but there's usually a larger goal for that. Is it contact us forms? Is it people on the site? So, definitely think about the larger goal, because we all want to be number one in Google, but I always tell my clients, yeah, you want to be number one in Google, but what would you rather be on page 2 of Google or number 1 in Bing? I'm not saying that I'm not going to work on Google, and I do get my clients number 1 in Google all the time when I did freelance work, but sometimes you can get better results of what they're looking for at the end of the day, but not what they're actually asking for. So definitely kind of look at that. There was someone in chat, a comment in chat that I wanted to mention. Navadeep said, you said the reason why something worked does not matter, but the reason it might matter, because if you know the reason, if it works versus it does not work, you can use that knowledge elsewhere versus testing over and over, right? Yeah, that's entirely correct. So if you do know a general reason, you can take those learnings and that knowledge and apply it to the site. But all I'm trying to say is try to not get so caught up into why the weird ones work sometimes. If, for example, you find that stock photos work better for your conversion, well, that's a learning that stock photos work better for your conversion, and apply that. But don't just assume stock photos are going to work forever or on every project. Test it, because every user group's a little different. But I find people that are like, well, this very specific case happened, and I don't, why did that happen? And oh, they go crazy, and they kind of go crazy with themselves, trying to figure every little thing out. At the end of the day, I'm a data guy, and I'm all about data-driven decisions. So hopefully that kind of answers that. But if you think you have a good plausible hypothesis of why that's working, take that learning and test it the next time. Because at the end of the day, the one thing that your website should never do is stay stagnant, because you can always make it better month over month. And that's the cool part about this, is you can always do little improvements that work. And sometimes your test will go the other direction, but that still is knowledge that you've gained. But just because it's worked for one project, don't assume it's going to work on the next one, because every set of users is a little different. University of Maine Digital Communications asks, are there WordPress plugins that help layer A/B testing into the core features, such as widgets, menus, headers, and templates? There are a couple A/B testing plugins out there. I really cautious people of using plugin A/B testing tools for this one simple fact: unless you're really, really, really good with robots files and routing, you do not want Google to index a test unless you're doing something very specific, like an SEO test. You want Google to index your production. So that's why I like the third-party hosted tools, because you don't do any changes on your production WordPress site until you get the learnings, because it's doing the change in the user browser agent side, not in the server side.